At 11:47 p.m. on March 3rd, a single encrypted signal left a server farm in Northern Virginia and pinged 17 devices simultaneously across Washington, New York, and Mar-a-Lago. The message contained no words, just a 47-second audio clip recorded 6 hours earlier inside the Capitol Speaker's ceremonial office. On that recording, you can hear the muffled sound of paper being shuffled, then a voice barely audible saying, "If he delivers that line about the cities, we move the vote up by 72 hours. The recipient list read like a shadow cabinet: 3 network executives, 2 Senate majority whips, 4 billionaire donors whose names you'd recognize from Forbes, but whose political machinery operates through 37 shell LLCs, and 1 former director of national intelligence who officially retired in 2023, but whose calendar, according to leaked metadata, shows 18 White House visits since January." That audio clip was never supposed to leave the room. Its existence represents what intelligence analysts call a structural breach. Not a leak, but evidence that someone inside the inner circle has begun documenting everything, building an insurance file, preparing for the collapse they see coming. 3 days later, at 9:02 p.m. Eastern, President Trump will stand before a joint session of Congress and deliver a State of the Union address that, according to 5 separate sources within the speechwriting team, has been rewritten 9 times in the past 11 days. But here's what those rewrites tell us. This isn't a speech. It's a battlefield maneuver disguised as a presidential address. The original draft, completed February 18th, was a standard administrative victory lap. Infrastructure projects, economic numbers, foreign policy posturing. That version was killed at 2:34 a.m. on February 21st after a conference call that included the president, his campaign manager, and 2 data scientists who presented modeling so disturbing that Trump reportedly went silent for 41 seconds. An eternity for a man who processes information through verbal combat. The model showed that if current trends hold through August, Republicans will lose 18 Senate race primaries to candidates Trump hasn't endorsed, fracturing his grip on the party's future and turning the midterms into a referendum not on Biden's absence, but on whether Trumpism can survive Trump. So the speech was gutted and rebuilt. The new version, according to a partial draft obtained through a congressional staffer who photographed 3 pages on their iPhone at 6:19 a.m. this morning, contains language specifically designed to force 12 vulnerable Republican senators into an impossible choice within 96 hours of the address. It includes a direct challenge to what Trump calls the consultant class, the Karl Rove strategists and Chamber of Commerce Republicans who've spent $30 million in the past 4 months quietly funding alternative candidates in 7 key states. It names no names, but the targets will know. More critically, it contains a single paragraph, 63 words long, that commits the administration to an executive action on immigration enforcement so aggressive that legal scholars in both parties believe it will trigger an immediate constitutional crisis, forcing Congress to either publicly support a legally dubious presidential overreach or break with Trump on primetime television while his base watches. This is the encirclement. The speech isn't meant to unify. It's meant to smoke out the defectors, force them into the light, and mark them for political execution before the midterm machinery even starts. And the 72-hour vote acceleration mentioned in that recording? It's a contingency. If Trump's approval among Republican voters spikes above 68% in the 4 days following the address, a threshold the data team considers achievable if the media cycle focuses on his confrontational tone rather than policy specifics, a coordinated block of House Republicans will fast-track 3 bills designed to box in Senate moderates before they can regroup. To understand why this moment feels less like politics and more like a controlled detonation, you need to understand the 3 architects who built the infrastructure that makes tonight's power play possible. These aren't the faces on cable news. They're the engineers of institutional capture, and they've been preparing this battlefield for over a decade. The first is Stephen Miller, who at 11:23 p.m. on election night 2016 wasn't celebrating. He was on a secure line with the Heritage Foundation's legal team, requesting every executive order draft related to presidential emergency powers compiled since the Reagan administration. Miller understood something fundamental that traditional conservatives missed. The administrative state isn't an obstacle to authoritarian governance. It's the delivery system. Between 2017 and 2021, his team didn't just write policy, they rewrote the procedural architecture of how presidential directives move through agencies. They installed what intelligence analysts call loyalty nodes, deputy administrators and senior counsels whose job wasn't expertise, it was compliance. 47 of those individuals are still embedded in federal agencies today, now in positions 3 levels deeper than they were in 2020, invisible to transitions and protected by civil service rules Trump's first-term appointees specifically manipulated. When that State of the Union directive on immigration enforcement gets issued, it won't face bureaucratic resistance. It'll face a pre-built highway of compliance because Miller spent 4 years turning procedural bottlenecks into express lanes that only activate when the right voice speaks the command. The second player is Susie Wiles, Trump's current campaign strategist, who in July 2023 did something unprecedented. She convinced Trump to stop attacking Ron DeSantis personally and instead let DeSantis' own donors destroy him. This required reversing Trump's every instinct, but Wiles understood the new math. She'd spent 18 months building relationships with exactly 63 mega donors who'd funded DeSantis, Cruz, and Haley. Relationships built not on ideology, but on a simple transaction: access to Trump's endorsement power in state-level races in exchange for their neutrality in the presidential primary. By October 2023, DeSantis was outspending Trump 4-1 on television, but losing by 30 points because Wiles had turned the donor class into hostages. They couldn't afford to win against Trump because their down-ballot candidates needed his blessing more than they needed ideological consistency. This created what political scientists call structural defection costs. The price of opposing Trump became higher than the price of submission. That infrastructure still exists. Those same 63 donors are now being offered Senate race endorsements for 2026 in exchange for funding Trump-approved candidates in 2025's off-year elections. Wiles built a loyalty program that runs on future favors, and it's now governing who gets to run for office 2 election cycles from now. The third architect is Elon Musk, whose relationship with Trump isn't about ideology. It's about information dominance. On January 14th at 3:47 a.m., Musk's X algorithm was quietly updated with what engineers internally call the amplification tier system. It assigns every political account a score between 1 and 10 based on engagement patterns. But here's the mechanism. Accounts that share Trump-positive content, even if they're otherwise apolitical, receive a 2.3x boost in algorithmic distribution for the following 72 hours. Accounts that share critical content see their reach reduced by 41%, not through shadow banning, but through deprioritization in the For You feed. This creates a financial incentive structure. Political influencers discovered that posting pro-Trump content tripled their follower growth and ad revenue, while criticism tanked their metrics. By March, 68% of political content creators had shifted their tone not because of belief, but because of mortgage payments. Musk didn't buy Twitter to control speech. He bought it to control the economic incentives underlying speech. When Trump delivers that address tonight, the algorithmic response is already programmed. Clips emphasizing his confrontational moments will automatically surface to 27 million users within 4 hours. Clips analyzing the constitutional concerns will reach 93,000. This isn't censorship. It's computational propaganda disguised as user preference. Now, the historical echoes. In 1933, German industrialists didn't support Hitler because they loved fascism. They supported him because the alternative was communist asset seizure, and Hitler promised to protect property rights while consolidating power. The compliance came from fear of the alternative, not enthusiasm for the leader. In 1972, Nixon's committee to re-elect the president didn't just break into Watergate. They ran a sophisticated operation that used IRS audits, FBI investigations, and media pressure to paralyze opponents before they could organize. The lesson wasn't don't commit crimes. It was control the enforcement mechanisms. In 2013, Viktor Orban didn't dismantle Hungarian democracy through a coup. He used constitutional amendments and judicial appointments to make opposition structurally unaffordable, forcing media outlets and businesses to self-censor to survive. The pattern is identical. You don't crush defiance through violence. You make compliance economically rational and defiance financially suicidal. The psychology of institutional compliance operates on a simple principle. Humans are pattern recognition machines wired for survival. When an institution's members observe that dissent results in career destruction while submission results in advancement, the calculus becomes biological, not ideological. Republican senators watch what happened to Liz Cheney, not just her loss, but the systematic destruction of her donor base, the primary challenges against every state legislator who supported her. The fact that her political career didn't just end, it was erased as a warning. Federal employees watch colleagues who question Trump-era policies end up in windowless offices processing paperwork until they resign. Media executives see that access to Trump generates ratings and that criticism generates advertiser boycotts organized by bot armies. The institution learns. The gears turn not because people believe, but because the alternative to turning has been architecturally eliminated. And tonight, when Trump issues that directive, the compliance won't come from loyalty. It'll come from the fact that Miller, Wiles, and Musk spent years building a system where saying no costs everything and saying yes costs nothing. February 28th, 4:17 p.m. A conference room on the third floor of the Republican National Committee headquarters, 14 blocks from the White House. No phones allowed inside. They're collected in a Faraday bag by a former Secret Service agent who now works private security for the campaign. 7 people around the table. Trump isn't there, but his presence dominates the room through a secure video feed that was supposed to be encrypted, but, according to a data forensics report later obtained by an investigative journalist, was recorded by at least 2 participants using camera-equipped smart glasses that bypassed the phone ban. This is where the strategy crystallized. This is where the decision was made to turn a presidential address into a loyalty test with criminal consequences. Susie Wiles opens, her voice measured, almost clinical. We have 17 Senate Republicans who've taken money from the Koch network in the past 9 months. 12 of them are up in 26. The speech gives them a choice: publicly support the enforcement directive within 72 hours, or we primary every single one with candidates who will. We've already got challengers recruited in 9 states. Stephen Miller leans forward, tapping a folder containing what he'll later describe as the constitutional framework. His tone is sharper, impatient. It's not just support. We need them to co-sponsor the enabling legislation. If they just release statements, we look weak. They need to put their names on paper, on record, before the legal challenges hit. Once they're co-sponsors, they can't back out when the ACLU files in the Ninth Circuit. A voice from the right side of the table, one of the RNC's senior strategists, a man who's worked for 3 presidential campaigns and knows when a plan crosses from aggressive to reckless. You're asking sitting senators to endorse an executive action that 18 constitutional scholars, including 3 from the Federalist Society, have already said exceeds presidential authority. You're not boxing them in. You're forcing them to choose between their careers and a legal liability that could follow them for a decade. Miller doesn't blink. The legal liability is the point. Once they're complicit, they can't defect. If this goes to court and they're on record supporting it, they're invested in our victory. If they refuse, we make them radioactive to the base before midterms. Either way, we control the battlefield. Wiles interjects, her voice colder now. We're not asking. The president's already decided. The question is execution. We've modeled 3 scenarios. In scenario 1, 11 senators support immediately, 4 waiver, 2 refuse. That gives us enough momentum to pressure the waverers within a week. In scenario 2, fewer than 8 support in the first 72 hours. That triggers the acceleration protocol. We move up the primary filing deadlines in 6 states through coordinated state party maneuvers. The RNC hasn't done this since 1964, but the rulebook allows it if the state chairs vote unanimously, and we control 14 of 17 state chairs in the target states. The strategist again, voice rising. You're threatening to collapse our own incumbents 8 months before an election where we're already defending 23 Senate seats. If this backfires, we don't just lose the majority, we lose it for a generation. This is when the recording gets interesting. There's a pause, 11 seconds of silence, and then a voice from the video feed, Trump's voice, slightly distorted by the connection, but unmistakable. Let me tell you something. These people, these senators, they've been riding my coattails since 16. They wouldn't have their jobs without me. Now they take Coke money and think they can play both sides. There are no both sides anymore. You're with me or you're Liz Cheney, and we know how that ended. Another voice enters, this one belonging to a legal counsel whose name isn't on the official meeting roster, but whose presence was confirmed through credit card records showing a charge at a restaurant 3 blocks from RNC headquarters at 6:43 p.m. that evening. His objection is procedural, but cuts deeper. If 8 senators refuse and you primary all of them, you're spending $160 million on internecine warfare while Democrats consolidate. You'll win the primaries and lose the generals. This isn't strategy, it's purge logic. Miller's response is the ideological core of the entire operation, and it's worth quoting in full because it appears verbatim in 3 separate accounts from people in that room. You're thinking about this election. We're building a party that can't betray us. If we lose 2 Senate seats now, but permanently remove the faction that thinks they can defy the president, we gain 20 years of structural control. This isn't about 26. It's about making sure that in 2030, no Republican can win a primary without our approval. Parties aren't built through persuasion. They're built through controlled demolition of alternatives. The strategist stands up. According to 2 witnesses, he actually pushes his chair back hard enough that it scrapes loudly against the floor. Then you're not building a party, you're building a cult with a kill list. Wiles, calm as ever, slides a document across the table. It's a ledger, 17 pages, printed that morning, showing donor contributions cross-referenced with Senate voting records on 12 key bills from the past 18 months. The pattern is undeniable. Every senator who voted against Trump-aligned legislation in 2024 received an average of $340,000 from 3 specific PACs, all of them tied to a network that's publicly committed to returning the Republican Party to fiscal conservatism and constitutional restraint. The ledger includes dates, amounts, and in 4 cases, copies of thank you emails from senators to donors that include language like, appreciate your support for principled governance and committed to preserving institutional norms. Wiles taps the document. This is the resistance, not Democrats. These 12 senators and their donors have already spent $9 million recruiting primary challengers against our candidates in state legislatures. This isn't hypothetical warfare. They fired first. We're just returning fire with superior ammunition. The room goes quiet. The legal counsel looks at the ledger, then at Miller, then at the video screen. He doesn't sit back down. Instead, he says very carefully, when this becomes public, and it will, you understand that every political scientist will compare this to Nixon's enemies list. Trump's voice from the screen, almost amused. Nixon's problem wasn't the list. It was that he lost. We're not going to lose. 2. The meeting ends at 6:02 p.m. By 6:15 p.m., the final draft of the State of the Union's Enforcement Directive section is emailed to the speechwriting team with the subject line, Final, no further changes. By 8:30 p.m., 7 of the 12 targeted senators receive phone calls from donors they've known for years, donors who funded their campaigns since their first runs for office. The message is identical. I've been informed that supporting the president's directive is non-negotiable. I'm sorry, my hands are tied. 3 of those senators will later tell confidants that the calls felt like hostage videos. The donors sounded scared. Here's what you need to understand. You're watching institutional capture in real time, and the documentation exists because someone in that room is building an insurance file. That recording, that ledger, the leaked emails, they're not accidents. They're evidence that someone inside the operation knows this ends badly and wants proof they objected when it started, which means the collapse is already priced in by the people engineering it. If you want to understand how power actually moves in Washington, not the speeches, but the phone calls at 2 a.m., the ledgers that never make it to campaign finance reports, the meetings where constitutional democracy gets negotiated like a corporate merger. Subscribe now, because what comes next isn't going to be announced in press releases. It's going to happen in rooms like this, and the only way you'll know is if you're tracking the forensic details everyone else ignores. March 4th, 11:34 a.m., 48 hours after the State of the Union, and the internal war is metastasizing into public view through 3 cascading failure points that Trump's team didn't account for. Not because they weren't predictable, but because the architects assumed they could control the narrative speed. They can't. Factor 1, mathematical inevitability. The Enforcement Directive requires the deployment of 14,000 additional ICE agents to 12 sanctuary cities within 90 days. But a leaked Department of Homeland Security memo dated March 2nd, obtained by ProPublica at 9:17 a.m. this morning, reveals that the agency currently has 6,100 trained deportation officers nationwide, and the hiring pipeline requires a minimum of 7 months from recruitment to field deployment, including background checks that can't be legally accelerated without violating federal employment law. The math doesn't work. The directive promises an operational capacity that physically cannot exist before the midterm elections, which means one of 2 things. Either the administration knows it's issuing performative orders designed to fail so they can blame deep state obstruction, or they're planning to deputize untrained personnel through emergency executive authority that would require declaring a national security crisis. 3 former DHS secretaries, 2 Republican, 1 Democrat, issued a joint statement at 10:52 a.m. calling the directive operationally infeasible and legally dubious. That's bureaucratic language for this is theater designed to create a constitutional confrontation, not policy. Financial markets understood immediately. Private prison stocks surged 23% in 2 hours on speculation that the administration will bypass DHS entirely and contract detention operations to private firms that don't face the same hiring restrictions. The invisible hand isn't reacting to immigration policy. It's pricing in the privatization of federal law enforcement. Factor 2, legal encirclement. Within 19 hours of the speech, attorneys general from 11 states filed coordinated lawsuits in 3 different circuit courts. But here's the strategic sophistication. They're not challenging the directive on immigration grounds. They're challenging it on 10th Amendment grounds, arguing that the federal government is commandeering state resources, local police, state courts, municipal detention facilities, without constitutional authority or compensation. This reframes the fight from immigration hawks versus progressives to federal overreach versus state sovereignty, which splits the conservative coalition. Libertarian-leaning Republicans who spent decades arguing that federal power should be constrained now face a choice: abandon their constitutional principles or break with Trump on states' rights. The lawsuits include a 237-page appendix documenting every instance from 2017 to 2021, where Trump administration officials argued for limiting federal authority. Quotes from Stephen Miller, from Trump himself, from DOJ briefs written by lawyers now working in the current White House counsel's office. This is legal Aikido, using the administration's own precedents as the weapon against them. The cases are designed to reach the Supreme Court by June, forcing a decision during primary season when Republican senators will be maximally vulnerable to base pressure while simultaneously facing judicial rejection of the policy they publicly supported. Factor 3. Institutional betrayal. At 7:43 a.m. on March 5th, the Wall Street Journal, not a progressive outlet, not a resistance paper, but the voice of corporate conservatism, published an editorial with the headline, "When Loyalty Demands Lawlessness." It doesn't criticize Trump's immigration goals. It criticizes the mechanism. A party that once defended executive restraint now demands that senators endorse presidential actions that circumvent statutory limits. This is not conservatism. It is Caesarism with a Republican label. Within 3 hours, 47 corporate PACs, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which donated $18 million to Republican Senate candidates in 2024, issued statements pausing contributions pending clarification of constitutional compliance standards. This is the donor class executing strategic silence. They're not opposing Trump publicly, which would trigger base backlash and primary threats. They're simply closing their checkbooks until after the legal challenges resolve, which starves the Senate campaigns of funding during the critical March to June window when media buys get locked in. It's political asphyxiation disguised as prudent neutrality. 6 Republican senators who were publicly wavering on supporting the directive suddenly have cover. They can cite fiduciary concerns and awaiting legal clarity instead of ideological opposition. The encirclement is complete. Trump forced them into a binary choice, and they found a third option by letting institutional gatekeepers create plausible deniability for their defection. The silence isn't weakness. It's the establishment using Trump's own momentum to pull him off balance, letting him charge forward while they step aside and watch him crash into the constitutional wall they've built in his path. Here's what happens next, and the probabilities aren't speculation. They're based on decision trees that both sides are wargaming right now with the same data models that predicted the 2024 primary outcomes within 2.3% accuracy. Stage 1, the 72-hour compliance window, March 4 to 7. Survival probability for Trump's strategy, 61%. This is the kill zone. By end of business March 7th, the administration needs at least 9 sitting Republican senators to publicly co-sponsor the enabling legislation that gives statutory backing to the enforcement directive. Right now, as of this recording, they have 4 confirmed, 3 from deep red states where Trump's approval sits above 70%, and 1 who's retiring and has nothing to lose. They need 5 more. The whip count operation is running 23-hour days, cycling through carrots and sticks, promised infrastructure projects for districts, threatened primary challenges, donor pressure applied through back channels. But here's the fracture point. If they don't hit 9 by Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, the narrative shifts from bold presidential leadership to failed power play, and the wavering senators gain permission to defect because the herd is already scattering. Expect leaked texts between senators and donors starting Thursday evening. Strategic leaks designed to show constituents that their representatives are standing firm against pressure while giving them cover to oppose without looking weak. The tell will be whether Mitch McConnell speaks publicly before Friday. If he stays silent, Trump's hitting the threshold. If he gives a floor speech about constitutional processes, it's over. Stage 2, the legal preliminary injunction phase, March 8th, 20. Survival probability, 43%. The 11 state lawsuits are fast-tracked, and at least 2 district courts will issue temporary restraining orders blocking implementation of the directive while the cases proceed. This is expected. What matters is Trump's response. The war game splits into 2 branches here. Branch Alpha. The administration complies with the injunctions, delays enforcement, and pivots the narrative to activist judges blocking public safety, which keeps the base energized but validates the legal challenges and makes the senators who supported the directive look like they backed a loser. Branch Bravo. The administration ignores the injunctions, declares a national emergency under the 1976 National Emergencies Act and orders DHS to proceed anyway, triggering a constitutional crisis where federal agents are operating under executive orders that courts have deemed unlawful. Branch Bravo has a 28% chance of happening, but if it does, survival probability drops to 19% because it forces Supreme Court intervention within days, and the current court, even with its conservative majority, has repeatedly ruled against executive actions that openly defy judicial orders. John Roberts will not permit institutional collapse of judicial authority to protect Trump's immigration agenda. If you see DHS issue operational guidance after a TRO is granted, you're watching Branch Bravo in real time, and it means Trump has decided to break the machine rather than lose the fight. Stage 3. The midterm recalibration, March 21st, April 4. Survival probability, 31%. If the strategy hasn't produced 9 co-sponsors and the legal cases are bogged down in preliminary hearings, the campaign faces an impossible choice. Double down with primary challenges against the defectors, which drains resources and splits the party 5 months before the election, or negotiate a face-saving retreat by claiming strategic patience while quietly shelving the directive. Historical precedent says they double down. Trump's psychology doesn't permit retreat, but the donor math becomes lethal here. If corporate PACs haven't resumed contributions by March 25th, 16 Republican Senate candidates will need to make up a projected $43 million shortfall using small donor fundraising, which requires increasingly extreme rhetoric that drives away suburban moderates. You end up with candidates who win primaries by out-Trumping each other, but lose generals because they've made themselves unelectable to anyone outside the MAGA core. The RNC's own modeling, according to a source who reviewed the projections in February, shows that this path leads to losing 3 to 5 Senate seats that were considered safe as recently as January. The fallout isn't just electoral, it's structural. If Trump's endorsed candidates lose while establishment-backed Republicans win in purple districts, it proves the brand is toxic outside the base, and the 2028 primary becomes a referendum on whether the party can survive another Trump cycle.